starting on, I believe, chapter 8. And chapter 8 is split up into two kind of sections, two movements, two periods of time. We have early Christian art, and then next lecture will be Byzantine. So, geographically, where we are located right now, we're still in Italy, but we'll be moving around Europe. So, we'll start it in Italy, in Byzantine. We will kind of move to Istanbul, current day Istanbul. Back then, it was known as Constantinople. We'll move to Spain, England, France, Germany, just all around Europe. Kind of like a pilgrimage, because at this time or near this time, pilgrimages were kind of the thing to do at the time. So, geographically, depending on where you were in Europe, East was Orthodox and West was primarily Catholic. Um, so, as we move into the early Christian period, it's important to think about how Christianity becomes the main religion of the Roman Empire, especially as it moves over to Constantinople. Christianity becomes the central religion. By 391, all temples and blood sacrifices are banned. Eventually, we see Christ's divinity formalized at the Council of Nicaea in 325. So during the 4th century, you see a lot in terms of formalizing the religion of Christianity. In this lecture, I will cover catacombs, sculpture, more primarily sarcophagi, architecture, talking about two new building plans, illustrated manuscripts, which are basically illustrations in the early texts or books, and mosaics. Mosaics I'll just touch on, but really go into it during the Byzantine lecture. So, looking at the beginning of Christian art, how did it look like? In early Christian, Jesus or Christ was depicted as very youthful, young, beardless, um, just a young man. Later on, after um, the monks and the iconoclast movement, they kind of depicted Christ as more serious, older, bearded, stoic, and just angry looking. Um, we'll touch on that in Byzantine. But there's two periods, persecution and recognition. Earliest Christian art comes from the catacombs. Um, Early Christians met in private homes, rarely in catacombs. Central planned churches are based on martyrs. That's important to know. I do believe that will be a question on a quiz. Um, Wall mosaics are the number one form of art. They're highly symbolic. And illustrated manuscripts played a huge role as well, because at the time, people didn't really read, so the pictures basically told the story. Going into catacombs, um, there's a lot of symbolism in these catacombs. Primitive Christian symbolism. It tells a lot about the early believers, their faith, and how they died. The sacred signs found throughout the darkened underground tombs were there to convey a message about the light of Jesus as comfort to both the living and the dead. Early Christian paintings illustrated the power and glory of Christ. They tell the story of Christ and his life. The catacombs or burial places of the early Christians consisted of long, narrow subterranean passages cut with regularity and crossing each other like streets in a city. So you have the city on top and then literally a whole city underground. And these Roman catacombs, they ran for 69 to 90 miles in length. So you can just imagine. These are huge, vast uh, catacombs, just systems of underground passages and burials. The graves are in the sides of these passages. There are some large rooms or chambers into which Long, narrow passages run. There are about 60 of these catacombs in and near Rome, and they are generally called by the name of the saint who's buried within them. The paintings are in the chambers. These paintings were more known as frescoes, and frescoes are just plaster walls that are pigmented. Um, and what else can we say? There will be some terms for the catacombs, but here are some images of how they might have looked like. And there is a lot of symbolism of placement of things, or images, or figures, or people. Um, and what this word rebus is actually the word for all these symbols. So rebus is a puzzle in which words are represented in combinations of pictures and individual letters. So when you think of rebus, just think of symbols, um, symbols that are symbolic. So in this picture here, we see that Christ is up above on the ceiling, and a lot of the times when things are painted on the ceiling, it's supposed to be symbolic of the heavens. So here in this picture, we see Christ as if he were in heaven. And then we have just some bones. And then here are some of these chambers. So each one of these boxes or cutouts in the wall would be a tomb. Sometimes, there were artifacts with these people and things like that. But some terms to know. We have gallery, which is the burial chambers. It's the entire network. We have tufa rock, and that's the type of rock that the catacombs were carved from. There's cubula, which are small rooms, loculi, which are shelves to place the dead. And, we see the loculi here in this image, this type of shelving unit. And then frescoes, like I mentioned before. So frescoes were used in order to, or in older areas, but they also were there to kind of paint scenes and tell stories. Okay. So, ceiling paintings. I did touch on it before, but painted ceilings in the catacomb, they were highly symbolic of heaven, and it was a place for Christ, the Good Shepherd. Today, domes are symbols of heaven. So, common rebus or iconography found in the ceiling are the fish, the Good Shepherd, and the anchor. Just kind of going through the meaning of these three. The fish is a very early Christian symbol found inscribed upon the walls of the catacombs from the first century. Uh, there's the Greek word for it, I cannot pronounce it, upon which a rebus, so once again a symbol, was created. Um, it's derived from the first letters of the Greek words meaning Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Good Shepherd is a Christian symbol found in Christian underground burial chambers. The Good Shepherd symbolizes Christ the Savior. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd giveth his life for his sheep. The shepherd represents Jesus, who will search devoutly for even one lost child of God until it is found. Pretty self explanatory, he herds the people. Or sheep. The anchor represents both hope in Jesus. The anchor symbolizes the concept of steadfastness, safety, and trust because it represents the safe arrival of the ship in harbor after a perilous voyage at sea. The anchor hidden in the cross symbolizes the Christian salvation in Christ and the arrival of the soul in the harbor of everlasting life. The anchor is the symbol of the commitment of the believer to the Christian faith. So here we have the fish, the shepherd, and then we have fish with the anchor. And then within the anchor, we see a cross. One of the most known ceiling paintings of early Christian art is the Good Shepherd, and it tells the story of Jonah and the Orients. Um, it is a painted ceiling of the cubulum in the catacombs in Rome, and it's from the earliest 4th century. So, people buried in the catacombs could have Christian scenes depicted around them. Here we have an example of a well known ceiling painting. In this scene, we have three interesting pieces of iconography, or rebus, we talked about. So, to divide this up a little bit, and let me get my little laser pointer here. Oh, cool. Okay. Maybe change the color. Let's do blue. Okay. So in the middle here, we have, of course, the representation of Christ as a shepherd in the center. He has a sheep around his shoulders. So you can see him as a shepherd, someone who is willing to take on his flock, but also willing to lay his life down for his flock. So this idea of sacrifice and crucifixion comes up here. As I mentioned previously, early on, Christ was represented more like Apollo, a very youthful, beautiful male, and tends not to have a beard. Today, we tend to think of him with a beard, but that's not the case here. Here in these four corners, we have figures known as the Orients. And the Orients, if you see their hand position, they're kind of open palmed, facing the skies. And these figures were meant to symbolize worshipers or people in prayer, since it's a prayer gesture. So these are praying figures. And the fact that they are facing or looking up towards the Good Shepherd, it's also symbolic. So finally, in the other four corners, kind of north, east, south, and west, we have the story of Jonah. And Jonah is a story from the Old Testament or from the Hebrew scriptures. So you can see Jonah, he does not want to go on and be a prophet. I believe in this scene. He's being thrown towards the whale in this scene, or to a sea monster that's waiting for him. He'll be swallowed by that sea monster or a whale, and then 3 days later he will emerge from the belly. And so, of course, this story foreshadows or predicts the story that relates to Christianity and the idea of resurrection of Christ. So you can link those two together. A lot of the Old Testament scenes that are represented are meant to link to the life of Christ or to the stories of Christ. And lastly, we have Jonah here, kind of reclining under a gourd tree, just as a side note. So yes, the takeaway from this ceiling painting is that it's kind of broken up into three stories or three rebuses. We have, once again, to summarize, Christ as the Good Shepherd, the praying Orients, and then the story of Jonah and the whale. A new term that we have in this chapter is something called syncretism. And syncretism, in a nutshell, is basically hybrid. So it's combining or merging several independent traditions. In the visual arts, art that combines traditions such as Imperial Roman and early Christian iconography can be described as syncretic. More recently, the term hybrid has gained popularity in art history. Um, Thinking about contemporary work, so modern day art, what could be considered hybrid? I mean, just contemporary work in general. It's a mixture of pop art because we're all about marketing these days and selling work. And then we have pop art mixed with contemporary or modern movements. So art today is pretty syncretic, I would say. Sculpture. So I do have a video that goes into this specific sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. There's a link at the bottom. But this will be our only example of early Christian sculpture, since early Christian art is very much focused on the underground, the catacombs. So, of course, you have to include the tombs or the sarcophagi. So, an example of syncretic work actually is in this. So, we see a combination of ancient Roman style combined with the new Christian iconography. This is also called the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, which is just packed full with iconography. So, first off, just in the general styles, basically you see the temple columns all along here, kind of dividing up the registers and scenes. So, these are more related to Roman art. Um, Going over the scenes quickly, I mean, the video does a better job of it, but we see images of the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. We see kind of early depictions of Adam and Eve, the arrest of Peter, and so on. Like I said, the video does a better job of going through each one of these registers. There was no cremation for the early Christians. Burials were the way to go. They wanted their sarcophagus decorated with symbols and narratives. Wealthy people were often placed in extravagant sarcophagi like this one. And also, there were individual sarcophagi, and there were also sarcophagi intended for couples. So if you had a spouse, you had the option of having be buried with them. Architecture. So we have two new styles or layouts. Here we have blueprints of examples of these two styles. They're very much polar opposites and easy to differentiate. First up, we have a longitudinal plan. So St. Peter's or Old St. Peter's Basilica. And I like to compare this to our modern day churches. So, a way of identifying a longitudinal plan structure is it has a very long nave, um, and then it has a cross section at the top of the nave. So here's the nave, here's the atrium. Atrium's kind of a outdoor area. So kind of we see right here atrium, nave, and then our cross section. And usually here we would have rooms for relics that would be visited during pilgrimages and things like that. And then we have central plan. So an example of this type of plan is Santa Costanza um, in Italy, and you can see the difference. It's already round. It's a much smaller structure. It's domed, and it's intended for not a lot of people to come and visit. So longitudinal, think a church gathering, things like that. Central, more intimate, meant to be more as a glorified mausoleum. So, kind of talking about or going more into a longitudinal plan. An example is Old St. Peter's, like I mentioned. So here we have some views of it. Let's go back to this. So Old St. Peter's, this church was the first church created probably under Constantine. You can see that it is done in a cross shape, like I said. So you have the addition of what's called a transept, where some of the relics of St. Peter were kept. This is the place where the remnants of St. Peter's body were buried. This was originally a cemetery, but you can see that there is a long area for processions. or different events to hold a lot of people. There's double-sided aisles. So look down here, we have our nave or our main room, and then we have double-sided aisles that were great for entering and exiting, especially with a lot of people attending. Um, there's an atrium out front and a gatehouse or a way of entering in the very front. This is which we see down here. Here's our gateway, our entrance. Um, and yeah, longitudinal plan is with a long nave down the center and a Latin cross plan with the long arm here. I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. I do have a video linked down below talking more about Old St. Peter's. Please check that out. And then here we see the inside. So pews, and then an altar, and then back here we would have the rooms for relics in these arched openings. On the contrary, I don't really like using this image because it's a fisheye lens, but it shows the ceiling paintings, and just, I guess, the inside and the round. But the other style we see here, this is Santa Costanza, in Rome, Italy. It's more of a circular structure and overall form. That's a better picture. Um, and it was most likely built as a mausoleum for Constantina, the daughter of Constantine. Once again, circular in overall form, which indicates this building was more of a burial complex, or similar to a Roman mausoleum. There's a sarcophagus over here on the inside. Um, it's a very, very small space. It's not meant for large crowds like St. Peter's. This is more of a private space, and there are more mosaics that have been survived within this structure. But some of these mosaics, they have been heavily restored. So central plant design, mausoleum, baptistry, ambulatory. Ambulatory refers to kind of a catwalk. So it would have like a balcony up top that you could access, and then it has 12 windows. Here we have close-up of the ceiling. Again, scenes depicting a story. Mosaics. Mosaics were the murals of the day. They were really rough up close, but told the story from afar. Pictures do what words cannot. Style was Greco-Roman and tesserae. I will go more into mosaics in the Byzantine lecture, but just to mention. Okay, some new words again. We have scroll to codex illuminated manuscripts. So prior to having books or codexes, people used scrolls or rotuluses. And scrolls were very important in ancient Rome, but of course, as you have more and more Christian books, you want to be able to turn from page to page. So codexes made more sense. Also, we see that these codexes were being produced in large numbers. These often were extremely luxurious. They would have been done by hand. They often included illustrations. So the type of paper they used at the time that replaced papyrus was vellum and parchment. Vellum's made out of calf skin, parchment's made out of lamb skin. Yeah. And here we have an example of these illuminated manuscripts. So something like this, tells a story better than words at the time. People didn't necessarily read, so, think of the saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A well-known illuminated manuscript is Christ Before Pilates from the Rosano Gospels. And this is a very expensive and impressive illustrated manuscript. It's done in Greek script, so the text that's written above and below is actually in Greek. The page itself, it's dipped in purple dye, and knowing the symbolism behind colors, purple usually refers to royalty, wealth. So the fact that this page is dipped in purple, it's an indicator that it was owned by a very important, impressive, wealthy individual. And the script itself is done in silver, which had become tarnished over time. The Rosano Gospels include the Gospel of Matthew and a portion of Mark. It's not entirely complete, but it does include the scene of Pilate judging Christ. So Christ is seen here with a beard. Um, we're starting to see more of that iconic representation of Christ. So we're kind of moving in a timeline um, as far as we talk about Christ and his representation. Barabbas, who's the other one that might have been punished, is also depicted, but it would have been probably Christ who was the one, or it was Christ who was the one to be selected to be crucified. We see an angry crowd demanding Christ to be crucified. So here we see people pointing. Um, their mouths are open. I wish I had a zoomed in example, but your textbook has a better image of this manuscript, so you could take a better look at that. But this crowd has angry people within it. They're shouting. Their mouths are open as if they were shouting. They're pointing, angry expressions. So they're demanding that Christ needs to be crucified, and we see him under arrest. But of course, Barabbas is kneeling over, whereas Christ looks very peaceful with his halo, uh, kind of up on a hill, so he is raised a little bit, looking very important. Pilate is at the center here, looking like a judge, jury, executioner. Um, but he looks very influenced by the crowd. We see a court reporter, I believe, over here or over here. Court reporter kind of jotting things down, the scenes, or just he's recording the proceedings of what's going on during this trial. Um, and we know that Pilate is in charge because he has these images of the emperor and the emperor's family behind him. So behind him here are little pictures of the emperor's family, and it's so tiny, but they're there. Um, yeah, that this is a pretty important manuscript, so be able to know how to identify it or its title and the story that's going on. It's the trial of Christ before Pilate, to see whether or not he will be crucified. And that is about it. So for next class, oh, here's the zoomed in picture. Check that out. For next class, I will record the Byzantine lecture, and then there will be a quiz for this chapter. Just to refresh your memory on due dates and things like that, on Monday, the extra credit discussion board will be unlocked and it locks back up on Tuesday. It's worth about 20 points. You could get 20 points of extra credit. Please take advantage of that. Tuesday, I will be teaching Byzantine. And then after class on Tuesday, so around noon, quiz for chapter 8 will unlock and then lock back up Wednesday midnight. So you have about a day and a half to do it. I plan on having the Byzantine lecture recorded by Monday so that you could access it before the class and be able to take the quiz accordingly. Okay, so this lecture included 2 outside videos. Please check those out. Email me with any questions. Have a good weekend.